My name is Marcus Longinus, Roman Centurion here in Jerusalem. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, 1 week goes by after another, and not all that much happens, not all that much changes. After all, my work has a certain routine to it. But recently I had a week that changed my whole life, changed everything I believe. It all started on a Sunday, the first day of the week, and I was standing on the city gate, looking out over the Kidron Valley off toward Bethany, and there before me were thousands of people streaming into the city. Now, this was in some sense a familiar scene. You see, I've been here in Jerusalem, stationed here for the last 10 years, and this was the Passover pilgrims arriving for Passover week. So I've seen this particular scene play out before, but there was something very different about what was happening that day. You see, in all those other occasions, there had never been a central figure, but this time there was this central figure, this man on a donkey. He was riding a donkey. I could make no sense of it. And the people, they were tearing palm branches out of the trees and laying them before this man, taking even the clothes off their back and laying them before this man on a donkey. And they were singing. I could hear them singing, "Hosanna! Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Now, when they got to this Son of David part, that's when this began to make sense. You see, as long as I've been here in this city, I've been warned about this Messiah figure that the Jewish people believe in. You see, they believe that this Son of David person, this Messiah figure will come and rid them of Roman rule. So this man, the man on the donkey, he had my attention now. You know, I don't carry this sword for nothing. There's plenty of a Jew out there that would like to do without Roman rule. So this man, he was being adored, you might say, and hailed as though he were a king. In any case, he was closer now. And I could see by his look, the way he held himself, that here was a man who was moving according to some plan or purpose, as though he was fulfilling his destiny. I could only guess what that might be. You know, just all of this noise, this commotion, this singing, it put a certain fear within me, but there was something strange about it. Maybe it was because of the singing, maybe because of the children that were mingled in there with this crowd. But it seemed, for some strange reason, as though this was right. As though, I don't know how to describe it, as though heaven and earth had come into some kind of a perfect agreement, an agreement that had never been achieved before. He was much closer now. He was just about at that place where he was about to go into the city, pass under the city gates, when suddenly he looked up at me. And for an instant, our eyes met. And I heard a voice, I clearly heard a voice say, "I have a future for you." I turned to the soldier beside me, a fellow named Claudius, and I said, "What did you mean by that?" He said, "By what?" I said, "By what you said about the future." He said, "Sir, I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything at all." Well, I was very confused at this point. I had just clearly heard this voice. And here we have this revolutionary figure, this Messiah figure coming into our city. And I knew absolutely nothing about him. So I got off that city gate. And I grabbed the first Jewish man I could get a hold of and demanded, "Who is that man? The man on the donkey?" He answered, "Jesus of Nazareth, the prophet from Galilee." Jesus of Nazareth. Well, I can tell you one thing. We're going to keep our eyes on that man. I didn't sleep very well that night. You know, when you're in charge of the security of a city like I am, and you have this revolutionary, this Messiah figure coming into your city, well, that gets your imagination going. And one of the things that really troubled me, is that we knew far too little about this prophet from Galilee. What we did know is that, yes, he had gone into the city, in toward the temple court area with those adoring thousands, but you know, he had also left, gone right back up that road toward Bethany later that day. So we knew he had left the city. And like I said, we knew far too little about him. So the very next day, I got dressed in what you might call my civilian clothes, my Passover pilgrim clothes, you might call them. And I went down to that same city gate, waiting at ground level, you might say, for this Messiah to return, because we were sure that, yes, he would be coming back. And I began waiting there, and it wasn't long, and a large crowd began to assemble. You see, he had set the whole city in a stir. His arrival had set off a real questioning about who this man really was. In any case, I joined that crowd, and it wasn't very long, and once again, this prophet from Galilee made this trip, walking down from Bethany, crossing the Kidron Valley, and coming up toward Jerusalem. And there was a good bit of a crowd with him, but it wasn't like the thousands of the day before. And when he arrived at the city gate, I just followed along with the others, wanting to know, a Passover pilgrim, you might say, wanting to know more about this prophet. And we followed him then off into the temple courts. Well, when we arrived there, it soon became clear that this prophet from Galilee was not pleased with what he saw there, not pleased at all. You see, for the duration of the Passover, the whole of what is called the Gentile court had been turned into what really amounted to a market. And this prophet had no intention of leading his followers into a shopping expedition. And with a loud, clear voice, he announced, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." And he overturned the money changers' tables and chased the merchants out of the temple courts. This man was a man of action. I was impressed. What happened next left me totally amazed. You see, it was the children who came to him. It was the lame and the blind. And you know, if someone had told me this story that I'm about to tell you, I would have said they were out of their mind. But I saw these things with my own eyes. There was a boy there, about 12 years old. Now, I've seen this lad about the city many times. He has, or had, a leg that's about that much shorter than the other. And this prophet from Galilee, he beckoned this lad forward, and he placed his hands on this boy's shoulder. And suddenly that leg that hung like a a loose rag. Suddenly, muscle that hadn't been there before began to appear on that leg. And soon that foot was down, and it began to jump and dance, and the whole of those temple courtyard echoed with his praise. They began to sing, Hosanna, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I'd never seen anything like this before. Oh, and next there was this father who came forward with his boy, maybe about 5 years old, and this boy was blind in one eye. Well, actually, I was standing so close. That's really not a good description, because I could see there was really no eye there. There was just an empty hollow socket where an eye should be. And this Jesus of Nazareth, he placed his hand across that empty hollow socket. And when he took his hand away, there was an eye there, clear and bright, and that boy could see. And then, next, there was this mother who came forward with her little daughter, maybe 3 years old. Well, I took one look at this little girl, and I knew exactly what was wrong with her. I knew it all too well. She was completely wasted away. Nothing but skin and bones on what looked like the last day or two, or maybe few hours of this little life. And this Jesus of Nazareth, he took this little child, this little bundle in his arms, and he turned toward the great temple doors, and I heard him whisper only 2 words: Father. Father. And when he turned back, that child was totally healed, totally changed, totally transformed. The life had come right back into her. I have never seen anything like this before. Never. Now, I'm sure he probably did other miracles that day. But I couldn't watch anymore, because all that kept going through my mind was thoughts about my daughter. Why didn't I know about this man, this healer, back then? Why did she have to die? Why?
Well, as the week rolled along, there was a certain tension in the air. This prophet from Galilee, he had his followers who hung on his every word, but kicking those money changers and merchants out of the temple courts didn't exactly endear him to those folks. And the high priest and his followers, they were not happy at all. They were losing revenue because of what he had done. And so there was a tension in the air. And as the week went along, as it progressed, it became clear something was going to happen. Something was going to break here. And sure enough, come Friday morning, I got summoned to the Praetorium, and I arrived there, and what do I see? Well, there's Jesus of Nazareth, and had been arrested, and the high priest was there, and all his followers, and a goodly crowd was there early in the morning, and they were demanding that this man, this prophet from Galilee,
that he be crucified. Well, Pilate examined him, questioned him, took him aside privately, and I could tell immediately that Pilate was not of a mind to do the high priest's bidding. And he announced to the crowd out front, "I find no fault in him." Well, this really should have settled the matter. But the high priest said, "He stirs up the people. He came down all the way from Galilee, and he says people shouldn't be paying taxes to Caesar." And Pilate said, "Is the man a Galilean?" And Caiaphas said, "Yes." "Well, then to Herod he should go. Why drag me into these things?" So I was put in charge of taking this man off to see King Herod, who was in the city for that week, the week of the Passover. Well, Herod had been wanting to see this prophet for quite some time, and he was hoping he would do some miracle, and he questioned him over and over. But Jesus was silent and wouldn't answer him a word. And with that, Herod simply sent him back to Pilate. Well, Pilate, when Jesus arrived, he went out again to the people and he said that Herod has examined him and found no fault in him either. I'll simply have him punished and released. Punished and released. That meant the whipping post. And so we took this prophet and had him whipped 40 lashes to his back. Shredded that back, cut open with cat of nine tails. Brought him back. And when this prophet was standing there, Pilate motioned to him and said, "Behold the man," thinking that seeing Jesus in this terrible state would result in some pity for him. But the cry went up when he motioned to him, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Well, Pilate tried another tactic. He said, "Who would you have me release to you at this time? As is my custom." And he had, just prior to this, asked me to bring out Barabbas. Now, Barabbas is a terrorist, an insurrectionist. Some of my men had their throats cut thanks to Barabbas. But Pilate had Barabbas brought out in Jesus of Nazareth. And he asked, "Who would you have me release to you at this time of the Passover, as is my custom? Barabbas, the insurrectionist, or Jesus, who is called King of the Jews?" And when he motioned to Jesus, the shout went up, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Well, I guess it was to please the crowd. Barabbas was released. And still, Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the high priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar. And anyone who claims to be a king is no friend of Caesar."
Well, at that point, I knew the die was cast. These were words, "We have no king but Caesar." These were words that Pilate had wanted to hear for quite some time out of the high priest's mouth. But Pilate continued with one more gesture. He said, You take him and crucify him. And he had a bowl of water brought out. And he made a great show of washing his hands and declaring, "Yes, you take him and crucify him. His blood be on your hands." And the high priest answered back, "And on our children." Now, those were fine words for Pilate to say, "You take him and crucify him." In fact, it was me and my men who took this prophet from Galilee off to Golgotha, the place of the skull, to be crucified. Now, when we arrived at Golgotha, there were two other men actually who were to be crucified along with this Jesus of Nazareth. And we offered them wine vinegar to drink mixed with myrrh. It acts as a drug, eases the pain. And both these other two men, they drank their fill of this stuff. But when we offered it to Jesus, he spat it out when he realized what it was. I had never seen this before. He spat it out. I thought, well, this man must think he's tough or something. And you know, he still had that look in his eye as though he were fulfilling some grand destiny or something. I thought, well, this man must think he's tough. You know, or something. I could have any of my 100 men nail him to the cross. But, you know, for the King of the Jews, I thought, I think I'll do this job myself. You know, he was silent throughout that time I was driving in those nails. We hoisted him up in that cross position. And that's when, for the first time, he spoke. With his arms stretched out, he said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." They don't know what they're doing. I kind of think I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And who needs his forgiveness anyway? But what's this talk about his father? He keeps talking about his father. And then some of those Pharisees and the high priestly types, they came up to the cross and they began mocking him and yelling at him. He said, "If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross. Then we'll believe in you." The Son of God. So this fellow thinks he's the Son of God. Well, his dad sure ain't treating him very well. The Son of God. Well, there were a lot of mockers that came up and hurled abuse at him, and Even the other two men began to do the same. But after a while, one of them said, "You know, we're up here for what we've done, but this man, he's done nothing wrong." And Jesus turned to this other man on the cross and said, "Today you will see me in paradise." Well, a little while later, about noon, his mother and one of his disciples came up, two other women as well. And Jesus committed his mother into the care of this disciple. And that was a hard thing to watch. Well, not long after that, it started to get dark. Now I don't mean the dark of, a cloud going across the sun. I mean, it got dark, the dark of night in the middle of the day. Darkness just settled over the whole of the land. And suddenly those mockers out there, they grew very, very quiet. And, if heaven and earth seemed to be in some kind of agreement on the day that he came into the city, it was now at this moment, it seemed as though, heaven above couldn't even look down. The very sun couldn't look down on what was happening on the earth on that cross. And at one point, he cried out, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." Someone in the crowd said, "He's calling out for Elijah." And someone else answered, "No. It means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" A short time later, he spoke again. "I thirst." And one of my men took a sponge and dipped it in that wine vinegar and held it up to him. And it wasn't long after that he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." His head dropped, and the earth began to roll and pitch. There was a mighty earthquake, and I fell to the ground. We all fell to the ground as that cross shook back and forth. And I said, truly, this man was the Son of God. He was the Son of God. The Son of God. Well, it was long and the sun returned once again. Because the next day was the Sabbath, we broke the legs of the other two men to hasten their death. Pierced his side. Be sure it was dead. And I left that hill that day with blood on my hands. It was the blood of the Son of God.
Well, the story didn't end there. It wasn't long, and after getting back to the barracks, I got a call once again to report to the Praetorium. And when I arrived there, the high priest, Caiaphas, was there, and he said to Pilate, and was speaking about this, he said that the prophet from Galilee had prophesied that after 3 days he would rise again. Now, when I heard these words, rise again, it sent a certain tingle through me. You know, after what I had seen in the temple courts as he healed those children, and after what I'd seen on Golgotha, where the sun refused to shine, to even look down on the earth while this man was dying, and when he took his very last breath, the earth itself shuddered. Rise from the dead? Well, this might very well happen. I didn't find that idea all that unusual at all. After all, miracle after miracle had happened. I'd seen these things. In any case, Caiaphas wanted a guard set, that no one would steal the body of this prophet. So, because I was involved with this throughout, I was put in charge of making sure a guard was set. And in fact, we went out to the tomb, which was a large rock, stone-carved tomb with a huge rock this tall that was rolled across the mouth of the tomb. And the body had been laid in there. And I had set a guard. In fact, we sealed that tomb, that stone, to be sure no one would tamper with it. And I had 16 men guarding that tomb from that moment on. Well, the Sabbath came and went, and then along comes Sunday morning. And all seemed good. You know, the guards were changed from time to time. And I made sure that was done, and as each shift went by. And early, very early on Sunday morning, once again there was an earthquake rumbled through the city and woke me. And it wasn't long, and the soldiers from the tomb began to show up at my gate, and they were in a state like I have never seen them. A state of panic. They said they saw an angel come down from heaven, bright as lightning, and when his feet touched the ground, the earth shook, and then this angel rolled the stone away, tossed it aside, you might say, as though it were nothing. And my men, they said they fell as though dead. And then, out of that tomb, Claudius, the man I mentioned before, he said these very words. He said, we saw this man, Jesus, come right out of that tomb. Well, what do you do with a story like that? Well, you go and investigate. I went to that tomb. I stepped into that tomb. And I can freely tell you that there was no body there. Well, again, what do I do with this? Because we were really doing this job for Caiaphas, for the high priest. We went and reported this to him. And of course, he sent messengers out there, and we looked at this scene together, including how
our men had fled for their lives after what they had seen. And yes, that stone had been tossed aside as though it were nothing. This was far bigger than any Roman army. Well, that afternoon, we had ourselves a meeting. The whole of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish High Council, was called together, and my men were called in, and I was called in to give an account of what had transpired there at the tomb. And my men told the story exactly as they saw it, as what had happened. And this went back and forth. We were called in one by one. We were called in as a group. On and on this went. Finally, at the end, a table was brought out, set before us. And we were each paid a handsome sum of money. And we're told, now, we don't want you to say anything about this. Keep this completely quiet. But if word gets to the governor, we'll look after that too. And you are to report that his disciples came and stole the body. Well, they could tell us whatever they like. They could fabricate this story if they wished, but my men knew exactly what happened there. And you know, word had spread. Word had spread throughout the barracks. Word had spread throughout the city. There were people going out to that tomb to see exactly what transpired there. And that tomb was empty. Well, after we left that meeting, it was late in the day. It was already late. And I returned to the city gate, to the very spot where I had stood on that first day I set eyes on this Jesus of Nazareth and watched him come into the city riding on that donkey. And that whole scene played through my mind once again. I didn't know what to make of all this that had happened. Anyway, I got off that city gate and went off. I crossed that Kidron Valley and went into a garden area, an olive grove area. They call this place Gethsemane. And I went there to just to think about this whole week, try to understand everything. Well, it wasn't very long, and I found myself on my knees. What bothered me was my role in this whole thing. What my hands had done. I had nailed him to that cross. And he was the Son of God. The Son of God. He was the Son of God. Great God in heaven. Great God in heaven, forgive me. Forgive me for what my hands have done. Forgive me for what I've done to your Son. It was your Son. Forgive me. Once again, I heard a voice. I clearly heard a voice say, I have forgiven you. And that's when I remembered Jesus' words. He said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. But I'm forgiven. I'm forgiven. I'm forgiven. You know, I got up from that spot and I felt clean. For the first time in my life, I felt totally clean, clean from the inside out. I felt like a new person, totally new inside. And you know, there was a time when I pledged my allegiance to the emperor. They say he's God. But you know what? On that night, I pledged my allegiance to Jesus, the Son of God. He's the one I want to follow. Now, as a Roman soldier, I don't know what that'll mean. I don't know how I'll live that out. But I know I want to follow him. Maybe it'll mean a cross. Maybe it'll mean death on a cross. I really don't know what my future holds. You know, on that first day, he talked to me. The first words I heard from him were, "I have a future for you. I have a future for you." I don't know what my future holds, but there's one thing I do know. My future, it's in his hands. They're nail-scarred hands, scars that I put there.